And when serious trouble arose, as with the Pequots of Connecticut in 1636 and 37, the colonists were able to rely on their village militia and expeditionary forces to provide security. So they had had trouble clear back in 36 and 37, but here they are in 1675 and serious trouble breaks out. The rapid growth of the English population eventually made the Indians of New England deeply apprehensive and resentful. They probably didn't mind a few of them around, but come on, it's more and more of you coming all the time. By 1675, there were more than 35,000 colonists living among 20,000 Indians in Plymouth, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. When at last the Indians were provoked to fight, the interspersed character of English and Indian settlements made the fighting unusually destructive and widespread. King Philip's War, which started in June of 1675 after Plymouth executed 3 Wampanoag Indians for murdering a Christian Indian, soon engulfed all New England. So an Indian converts, 3 other Indians murder him, they put him to death. The whole thing goes up in flame. Tinderbox. Now it goes over some rather excruciating detail about the early desperate fighting. Then the English colonists get the Indians sort of on a run. So segue to that. In destroying nearby Indian villages, the English learned that the Narragansetts had retreated to a secret fortified village in the Great Swamp, about 10 miles southwest of Wickford. Knowing that 300 Connecticut troops were nearby and that their own supplies would soon be exhausted, the Massachusetts and Plymouth troops decided to join their Connecticut allies and proceed at once to attack the Narragansett village, 10 miles into a swamp. On December 19th, the intercolonial army of nearly 1,000 men pushed through heavy snow. This is not normal campaign weather. Against the northern edge, into the northern edge of the Great Swamp. There the Connecticut troops who were in the van exchanged fire with a party of Indians. When the Indians withdrew into the frozen swamp, the Connecticut troops followed, eventually reaching the secret village, 5 or 6 acres of high ground surrounded by a palisade and containing shelter and supplies for 1,000 Indians. Quite a fortified little town in there. Secret inside the swamp. No white men knew about it. Without waiting for reinforcements or instructions, the Connecticut troops attacked through the one unfinished portion of the palisade. Wow, they just would have got that fort finished a little damn sooner, huh? They succeeded in forcing their way into the village, but were met there by such heavy musket fire that they had to withdraw. The remainder of the Allied army now arrived, and a second attack by the whole of the intercolonial army succeeded in taking the village and burning the Indians' wigwams and stores. Although the undisciplined and intense fighting had taken a heavy toll of the colonists, about 220 killed or wounded, that's about 20% of their fighting forces, the colonists had inflicted even heavier casualties on the Indians and had destroyed their food and shelter. A lot of effort had gone into that fortified village they put in the middle of that swamp. Whole thing up and gone. That evening the colonists retired to Wickford. It would be another month before the intercolonial army could assemble men and supplies to continue their offensive. So they were exhausted, and it took another month to get another effort going. And in late January and early February, the colonists made a difficult march of about 70 miles from Wickford through Rhode Island and Massachusetts to Boston in a futile effort to overtake and destroy what remained of the Narragansetts. So they got their fortified thing here. They know there's some Narragansetts up in Boston. 70-mile hike in January. Let's go. On February 5th, the army was disbanded. The war was by no means over. The Indians were still able to push the colonists, but it was only a matter of time before the colonists' superior numbers, resources, and organization would destroy the Indians of southeast New England. In February and March of 1676, the Indians went on the offensive once again, attacking English communities from the Connecticut River Valley to Rhode Island, and forcing many colonists to give up their villages and to withdraw to towns around Boston. The colonists had suffered greatly in King Philip's War, losing more than 5% of their population and a dozen towns, but they had permanently broken the power of the Indians of southeast New England. Now, the next chapter is the Colonial Wat Wars. Not the next chapter, the next section. although fighting between the Englishmen and the Indians continued through the remainder of the colonial period, that fighting gradually blended with and became subordinate to wars between the English and other European colonists in North America. So you see the simultaneous decline of the importance of the Indians and the elevation of the importance of other European groups. Now, the English had a different model for how to gain wealth from the New World than anybody else. So it's no mistake that they became so influential. The model to gain wealth from the New World for the Spanish and even for the French was just to go there and take stuff, bring it back. For the French it was furs, for the Spanish it was gold, but for the English it turned out being tobacco in the early years, and ended up paying like 15 or 20% of the English crown's taxes at one time or another, or maybe more, I don't remember. It was extraordinary. He called it the stinking weed, but they had to put up with it. Anyway, let us continue. Only rarely in Queen Anne's and King George's wars, brutal and indecisive conflicts, did regular British forces support the colonists. So there's through all the wars that were going to happen in the colonial period, and it names a bunch of them there. We skip over that because we don't need all of that. For more than a century before King William's War, the English had competed with the Spanish, French, and Dutch for the land and wealth of North America. By right of discovery and papal decree, the Spanish had first claimed North America when? 1494. And they had been able to sustain that claim through most of the 16th century, the 1500s, in part because they had a superior fleet, and in part because their rivals were preoccupied with European affairs. They did have a better fleet. Well, we'll hear about that. But as Spain became mired in the 80 Years' War with the Dutch, 1567 to 1648, and as the Spanish navy and merchant fleet began to decay, the French, Dutch, and English pushed into North America. It names here that they got involved in an 80-year-long war with the Dutch, and that the Spanish navy and merchant fleet began to decay. Those are secondary causes. Why did they get in a long war with the Dutch? Why didn't they have the foresight to pull out or change their policy? Okay, put that on the table. Why was their fleet decaying? Why didn't they have the money or the incentive or the know-how? Surely they had the know-how or the drive to repair, rejuvenate, and add to their fleet. Question number 2. What caused these causes of their loss of empire? And it was their statism. It was their ever gaining controls on their economy, the growth of their state. Now, their state was not allowed to grow too vigorously. This isn't the history of Spain right now, I'll just mention this. Their state wasn't allowed to grow too vigorously because it was so busy with the 800-year-long war, which ended when? Please, when? 1492. Actually, Columbus came and asked Isabel and Ferdinand for ships to sail out to the west, and they said, we're busy with this war. And he was on his way back to Italy, I think, back around, up through France, and they sent horsemen to catch him, because they won a battle, a crucial battle, and they actually found Columbus and told him, come back, we're ready to talk. They pushed the Moors off the end of the Spanish, what is it, peninsula? And is it called Iberia? They were finally able to focus the efforts of the state on something else. And for one thing, they sent Columbus off with these ships. And for another thing, they began to grow their state controls. Fast forward 100 years, and they are on the decline.